It began with a sound that wasn't supposed to exist inside Windsor Castle, a sharp echo of anger slicing through centuries of royal decorum. The hall was silent, the cameras focused, the world watching. And then came a voice, raw, trembling, furious. "Stop it, father. I'm your child, not him." For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The royal guards froze. The queen consort stiffened. King Charles III turned toward the voice with eyes wide, his sword suspended in midair above David Beckham's shoulder. The ceremony that should have been a polished, regal moment suddenly became a public fracture in the royal family's fragile image. And standing just a few feet away, visibly shaking, was Prince Harry. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine it, generations of royal legacy collapsing into a few whispered words. A knighthood that should have symbolized honor now looked like betrayal. Cameras rolled, microphones caught everything, and the soundbite was on every social feed before the echoes even died inside Windsor's stone walls. But what drove Prince Harry to such a moment of defiance? Why did he, the son of the monarch, explode with a cry that sounded less like rage and more like heartbreak? What could make a man who once represented the future of the British monarchy risk everything in a single outburst? To understand this, we have to step back to the cold marble floors, to the long shadows of history, to the weight of one family's unspoken resentments. Because this story isn't just about a knighthood. It's about lineage, legacy, love, and a son's desperate fight to be seen. The moment David Beckham was knighted by King Charles III should have been nothing more than a feel-good headline. A national hero, a global icon, finally recognized for decades of service to sport and charity. The image was perfect, Beckham kneeling gracefully, Charles smiling with restrained pride, the sword gleaming under the chandeliers. Every frame exuded elegance. Until Harry's voice broke through. The world gasped. The tabloids called it the shout heard around the world. Royal commentators scrambled for explanations. Was Harry protesting his father's decision to honor a celebrity? Was it a misunderstanding? Or was it something darker, something deeply personal? For years, tension between Harry and his father had simmered beneath the surface. Public appearances masked their distance. Carefully worded statements disguised private disappointment. But for those who knew how to read body language, the disconnect was undeniable. When King Charles smiled at Beckham that day, it wasn't just a smile of royal approval. It looked, to Harry, like a father's pride he hadn't felt in years. To Harry, that knighthood wasn't just an award. It was a replacement, a silent confirmation that he had been pushed aside. He didn't see a football legend being honored. He saw another man being lifted where he should have stood. And that's the part the cameras didn't capture, the years of wounds behind that shout. The bitterness didn't begin in Windsor that day. It began in boyhood, in the corridors of Kensington Palace, where Harry watched his father's affection flicker in public but fade in private. It began the day he overheard whispers about his own paternity, rumors he was forced to grow up with, yet never allowed to confront. It began the moment his mother, Princess Diana, warned him that not everyone inside the palace would protect him. For Harry, every smile from his father came with a question mark. Every embrace felt rehearsed. And when Charles finally found someone like Beckham, a man admired, disciplined, flawless under pressure, it stirred something in Harry he couldn't control. Resentment, jealousy, and pain. But that's not what the cameras saw. To the public, it looked like a tantrum. To the palace, it was an embarrassment. To Harry, it was survival, one last cry from a son who had lost his place in his father's world. Still, there's more to this than emotion. Behind the spectacle, there were whispers, stories that the ceremony itself had been carefully planned to send a message. That Charles wanted to demonstrate what loyalty looked like. That Beckham's knighthood was, in part, a symbolic contrast to Harry's rebellion, and that the invitation, or lack of one, was no accident. Here's what palace aides never expected. Harry showed up anyway. Uninvited. Unannounced. He walked into Windsor Hall minutes before the ceremony began, dressed not in royal regalia, but in a simple dark suit. No fanfare. No entourage. Just a determined, haunted expression. Witnesses say the room went still when he entered. Even Beckham, ever the professional, faltered. Security hesitated, waiting for orders. But Charles said nothing. The ceremony proceeded, until it didn't. And when the king's sword glinted in the air, something inside Harry broke. That's when he shouted, "I'm your child, not him." Imagine the horror, the silence that followed, the disbelief in every face in that ancient hall. The moment was royal history rewritten, not with grace, but with grief. What happened next was chaos. Aides rushed forward. Camilla whispered sharply. Beckham stood frozen, unsure whether to rise or bow again. Charles lowered his sword slowly, as if the weight of it had suddenly tripled. And Harry, his voice still trembling, turned and walked out. But this story didn't end at Windsor Castle. It started a chain reaction that exposed hidden truths, reopened old wounds, and forced the monarchy to face questions it never wanted to answer. Because as reporters swarmed outside, one phrase kept circulating. Why did Harry say that? Was it anger over Beckham's friendship with the palace? Or was it deeper, something about that word, child? In that single cry, Harry revealed a lifetime of insecurity. Every rumor about his father, every whisper that he was different, every moment he wondered if he truly belonged. And that's why this story matters now, because it isn't just about royal titles or media feuds. It's about identity, the primal need to be seen by your own parent. The knighthood was merely the spark. The explosion was decades in the making. When the world saw King Charles smiling at Beckham, Harry saw a father proud of someone who wasn't his son. When Charles raised his sword, Harry saw it as a symbol of replacement, one man being elevated while another was exiled. To Harry, it wasn't a ceremony. It was a coronation of betrayal. You see, fame has always been a delicate currency inside the royal family. They trade on image, not intimacy. And while Beckham mastered the art of image, Harry dismantled it. He walked away from the monarchy, from the system, from the very institution that defined him. But deep down, he never walked away from wanting his father's love. And that's what made this scene so heartbreaking. Because when the cameras zoomed in, what they captured wasn't just anger. It was a son watching his father knight the man who, in the public eye, embodied everything he wasn't. But here's the twist. What if this wasn't random? What if Beckham's relationship with the royal family had roots far deeper than the tabloids have ever revealed? What if, behind those smiles, there was a bond that blurred the line between admiration and favoritism? The truth, as it turns out, isn't as clean as it looks in the photos. Behind closed doors, Beckham and King Charles shared more than charity dinners and public causes. There were private phone calls, exclusive invitations, and quiet meetings long before Harry's exit from royal life. Some insiders even suggest Beckham became a trusted advisor, someone Charles could rely on when his own family felt unreachable. So when the day of the knighthood came, it wasn't just an award, it was a statement. A declaration that loyalty, not blood, earned the king's favor. And that's what tore Harry apart. He wasn't just losing a title. He was losing a father's validation to a man outside the family. The symbolism was unbearable. The man who built his fame on football now stood as the monarch's model of discipline, while the prince who sacrificed military life for family was branded as defiant. And the irony? Beckham's quiet obedience was everything Charles had wanted in a son. But Harry's outburst revealed something the palace could no longer hide, a generational wound. The monarchy thrives on silence. But silence, in Harry's world, has always meant pain. That day, he decided to break it. His words weren't royal protocol. They were human. "I'm your child, not him." 6 words that stripped away centuries of ceremony. And maybe that's why the moment went viral. Because beneath the crowns and titles, it echoed something universal, a plea to be loved, acknowledged, remembered. The palace immediately issued no comment. The media filled the void. Headlines ranged from sympathy to scandal. Was it emotional breakdown or deliberate protest? Was Harry under stress? Or was this the moment he finally said what he'd been holding in since childhood? But one thing was certain, the monarchy's image had cracked again. This time, not from scandal or politics, but from heartbreak. Still, as shocking as the public outburst was, it was only the beginning. What happened before that day, what was whispered in private calls, written in secret letters, and discussed behind palace walls, was far more explosive. Because the story of Harry and Charles isn't just father and son. It's a saga of identity, jealousy, and the silent war between blood and belonging. And this knighthood? It was just the spark that reignited everything. In the coming chapters, we'll unravel the hidden tension between Harry and Beckham, We'll uncover how Meghan Markle's falling out with Victoria Beckham added fuel to a royal rivalry. We'll reveal the forgotten letter from Princess Diana that warned of exactly this kind of betrayal. And we'll explore why, when Harry shouted that fateful phrase, the world heard more than rebellion. It heard truth. But for now, remember this: behind every royal ceremony, there's always a secret script. And on that day at Windsor, Harry refused to follow it. What he did next would leave the palace scrambling, and the entire world questioning everything they thought they knew about the House of Windsor. Because sometimes, the loudest words are the ones spoken in pain. And sometimes, one son's cry can shatter a crown's silence forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The morning of the ceremony looked deceptively perfect. Golden sunlight spilled over the sprawling lawns of Windsor Castle, the air thick with the kind of rehearsed elegance that only the British monarchy could summon. Cameras were lined up like soldiers, reporters murmuring predictions, and every flashbulb felt like a heartbeat pulsing through centuries of royal tradition. For the public, it was a celebration, a symbol of unity, pride, and grace. But for those who looked closely, there was tension behind the smiles, the kind that hides behind polished crowns and freshly pressed uniforms. And at the center of it all stood two men whose stories couldn't have been more different. King Charles III, the monarch who spent a lifetime waiting for his crown, and David Beckham, the global icon who wore fame as effortlessly as a tailored suit. Beckham's arrival drew cheers. He waved politely, humble as ever, his wife Victoria at his side, wearing quiet confidence. He looked like a man born for the moment. Not nervous, not proud, just balanced. The crowd adored it. The cameras drank it in. Inside, the ceremony was set to begin. The hall smelled faintly of old wood, polished silver, and anticipation. Every chair gleamed, every uniform immaculate. It was the kind of perfection that made you forget the cracks beneath it. The palace's public relations team had orchestrated everything down to the second. Every bow, every smile, every camera angle had been rehearsed. To them, it was a flawless performance. A statement that the monarchy could still inspire, still command love, still matter. And it worked until it didn't. Because what no one knew, not even Beckham, was that someone else was about to make an entrance no one could script. Minutes before the ceremony began, a hush fell over the hall. A single door at the back creaked open, and a figure stepped in, tall, familiar, and uninvited. Prince Harry. The reaction was immediate. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd like electricity. Some gasped. Some simply froze. Harry wasn't supposed to be there. His name wasn't on the guest list. But there he was, dressed in a dark suit, eyes fixed on his father at the far end of the hall. King Charles looked up, startled for the briefest moment. Then his face hardened. The ceremony had to go on. He turned his gaze back to Beckham, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Harry remained standing in the shadows, hands clenched. To the cameras, it looked like calm, and a strange son showing up to support his father. But those who knew Harry could see it in his posture. The tension, the restraint, the storm. When the orchestra began to play, Harry didn't blink. When Beckham stepped forward, he didn't move. But when the king raised his sword, the symbol of royal approval, of generational pride, that's when something in Harry cracked. You could almost feel the air change. Witnesses later said the moment felt eerie, like the room itself was holding its breath. The sword glinted. The world watched. And then it happened. "Stop it, father." It wasn't a whisper. It was a roar, raw, jagged, bursting from years of buried resentment. Every sound in the room died instantly. Even the orchestra halted mid-note. The echo of Harry's voice bounced off the stone walls, sharp enough to make even the guards flinch. And then came the words that turned a royal ceremony into global breaking news. "I'm your child, not him." 6 words that no one could unhear. The cameras caught it. Every microphone picked it up. Within seconds, the moment was immortalized. The look on Charles's face said everything. Shock, anger, heartbreak, confusion. A monarch suddenly stripped of composure. Beckham froze, still kneeling, unsure whether to rise or stay put. His wife's eyes darted nervously toward the king. Aides began to move, quietly signaling to security, but Charles raised his hand, stopping them. His lips trembled as if forming words he couldn't speak. The silence was painful. In that stillness, centuries of tradition cracked open. For a moment, It wasn't king and prince. It was father and son. One kneeling, one shouting, both trapped in the glare of 1,000 eyes. And the irony was unbearable. This was supposed to be a moment of national pride, a bridge between monarchy and the modern world. Beckham's knighthood was meant to remind Britain that honor still existed, that the crown could still command respect. Instead, it became a symbol of division, because everyone watching understood what they were really seeing, a family unraveling in real time. To some, Harry's outburst looked like jealousy. To others, it sounded like heartbreak. But the truth, as always with the royals, was far more complicated. Let's rewind. For months before this event, whispers had been circulating in royal circles. King Charles had been increasingly close to David Beckham, inviting him to private dinners, consulting him on charitable partnerships, even referring to him as a national treasure in personal correspondence. That phrase hit Harry harder than anyone realized. National treasure. He had served in Afghanistan. He had launched the Invictus Games for wounded veterans. He had represented Britain with pride long before walking away from royal life. Yet somehow, his father's public praise seemed reserved for someone else. And now, that someone else was kneeling before the man who once called Harry my darling boy. Every camera caught the contrast. Beckham, graceful, composed, shining under the royal sword. Harry, rigid, pale, standing in the shadows, the outcast at his father's coronation of another man. Even before he shouted, the image was heartbreaking. And it didn't help that the tabloids had been merciless. They had drawn comparisons for months. Beckham the loyal Englishman, Harry the runaway prince. Beckham the model family man, Harry the rebel husband. Beckham the patriot, Harry the exile. Now those narratives collided in one perfect photo opportunity. A king and a knight. And a forgotten son watching from the sidelines. The world saw royalty honoring celebrity. Harry saw a father replacing his child. When he finally shouted, it wasn't a calculated move. It was instinct, a desperate attempt to reclaim something he felt slipping away since childhood. And that's what made it tragic. Because even after all the interviews, the memoirs, the confessions, Harry was still searching for the same thing he'd always wanted: validation. Not from the public, from his father. But King Charles couldn't give him that. Not in public. Not while the cameras were rolling. The monarchy doesn't allow emotion to interrupt ritual. That's the rule. So instead of answering his son, Charles did what royals have done for centuries. He carried on. He lowered his sword onto Beckham's shoulder. "Arise, Sir David." And just like that, the ceremony resumed, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Outside the castle, reporters picked up the story instantly. Within minutes, social media was ablaze. Clips of Harry's shouts spread like wildfire, each one replayed, analyzed, and dissected by millions. Did he really say that? Was he drunk? Is this the end of reconciliation? Theories flooded every corner of the internet. Some called it the ultimate act of rebellion. Others said it was a cry for help. But one thing was certain. Prince Harry had just rewritten the narrative. And behind closed doors, the palace was in panic mode. Phones rang nonstop. Advisors argued about statements. PR teams drafted and deleted responses. The king's press secretary reportedly fainted. Camilla was livid, calling it disrespect beyond reason. William was silent, refusing to comment. The monarchy's well-oiled machine had no manual for this. Because this wasn't a scandal involving leaked photos or political missteps. This was something far more dangerous. It was raw emotion. And that's the one thing the British monarchy can never control. When Harry stormed out of Windsor that day, cameras followed him all the way to his car. He ignored every question. No bodyguards. No statements. Just a man breathing heavily, staring out the window as the car pulled away. Inside the palace, Charles remained composed until the cameras stopped rolling. Only then, behind the gilded doors, did he slump in his chair and whisper to his aide, "He shouldn't have been here." Those 6 words mirrored his son's. But where Harry's words came from pain, Charles's came from fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of exposing the cracks. Fear that the monarchy, after all its survival, might finally be undone not by scandal, but by love that curdled into resentment. Meanwhile, Beckham was caught in the crossfire. The headlines twisted his moment of honor into controversy. Harry versus Beckham, the royal rift no one saw coming. He released a simple statement thanking the king for a lifetime's honor of service to the crown. But the damage was done. Every photograph of him kneeling became a metaphor. For one man's rise, another's rejection. And yet, behind the noise, there was a question no one dared to ask out loud. Why did Harry say those exact words? I'm your child, not him. Not stop this. Not you're ignoring me. But something primal. Something that hinted at years of quiet torment. Did Harry feel that his father truly saw Beckham as a symbolic son? Or was there something deeper, a personal betrayal hidden behind that sword, that ceremony, that smile? Royal insiders hinted that Beckham's relationship with the palace had evolved far beyond the public eye. Some whispered that he had been a confidant during Charles's early reign, helping navigate image crises after the Sussex fallout. Others said Charles often compared Beckham's humility to Harry's volatility. If those whispers were true, Harry's outburst wasn't just jealousy, it was vindication. A breaking point. The inevitable explosion after a lifetime of restraint. And what made it worse was how the palace handled it. Hours later, when the official photographs were released, Harry's presence was scrubbed from every frame. He had been digitally erased, like a ghost haunting a family that wanted to forget him. That's when the internet exploded again. Did they really crop him out? Is the monarchy rewriting history in real time? It became a PR disaster. But beneath all the noise, the tragedy remained simple. A father honored another man while his son begged to be seen. And that's why, even days after the ceremony, the image wouldn't fade. A sword, a crown, a son shouting from the shadows. That moment would define the monarchy's modern era. Because it wasn't just a slip. It was a revelation. The monarchy, for all its power, could no longer hide its fractures. The ceremony that began as a celebration ended as an awakening. And as Harry disappeared into the London night, the question lingered, not just for the royal family, but for everyone watching. What happens when blood isn't enough to bind? Because what came next would reveal secrets even the palace couldn't bury. It wasn't always war between Prince Harry and David Beckham. Once, they were allies, brothers in arms in the world of charity, sportsmanship, and national pride. Once, their names appeared side by side in headlines about teamwork and compassion. Once, they laughed together. But something shifted. Something invisible, slow, and corrosive. And by the time King Charles lifted that ceremonial sword, what had begun as friendship had quietly transformed into rivalry. To understand how it happened, we have to go back. Back to the glory days. The year was 2013. Harry was still the charming, cheeky prince. Military uniform crisp, smile effortless, charisma unshaken by controversy. He was the people's favorite royal, the fun one. The one who could make a room full of veterans or children laugh without effort. Beckham, on the other hand, had just retired from professional football, a global hero transitioning from sports legend to philanthropist. When the two men joined forces to support the Invictus Games, it was a PR dream. They stood side by side on the training fields, joking, tossing footballs, shaking hands with wounded veterans. Cameras loved them. The headlines wrote themselves. Two British icons, one cause. The chemistry was undeniable. Harry admired Beckham's discipline and drive. Beckham respected Harry's passion and humanity. They weren't just two famous men. They represented different kinds of British pride. One royal, one commoner, one born into legacy. The other built his own. And for a time, that balance worked. But the palace is a strange place when it comes to friendship. Every alliance has consequences. Every bond has observers. Behind closed doors, whispers began to form. Some courtiers saw Beckham's growing influence as a useful modern asset. He had charisma, global recognition, and none of the royal drama. To them, Beckham was a perfect PR shield, someone who could soften the monarchy's aging image. And Charles noticed. He began inviting Beckham to private events, not just charity galas, but closed meetings about the monarchy's modernization efforts. Beckham was discreet, elegant, easy to manage. Harry, meanwhile, was starting to drift. He'd begun dating Meghan Markle. The tabloids were relentless. The royal household grew anxious about his impulsiveness. Suddenly, every move he made was branded as reckless. Beckham rose as Harry fell. The public didn't see it, but Harry did. He noticed when his father mentioned Beckham more often in speeches than him. He noticed the subtle shift in tone. Charles referring to Beckham as a remarkable representative of British values. That line stung, because Harry believed he'd already earned that title, with sweat, sacrifice, and scars. You could almost chart their rivalry like a graph, one man's popularity rising as the other's reputation sank. And then came the leak, the one that changed everything. A story appeared in a London tabloid claiming that Meghan Markle had accused Victoria Beckham of leaking private details about her life to the press. The article was explosive. It painted Meghan as paranoid, insecure, and mistrustful of her celebrity circle. At first, both couples denied it. But behind the scenes, things turned icy. The Beckhams felt insulted. The Sussexes felt betrayed. It was a minor social spat, but in royal circles, optics are everything. Overnight, the two couples who once dined together at Kensington Palace became strangers. And as that friendship died, so did the bond between Harry and Beckham. It might have ended there, just a cooling of relations, another royal rift forgotten by the next headline. But Charles had other plans. In the years following Harry's departure from royal life, King Charles leaned more heavily on figures like Beckham to represent the modern monarchy. Beckham attended climate events, appeared at royal functions, and publicly voiced support for Charles's environmental initiatives. Each appearance made headlines. Each headline widened the gap. Harry, now across the Atlantic, saw it all unfold from California. Every smiling photo of Charles and Beckham was a reminder of what he'd lost. And worse, a reminder of who'd replaced him. When Invictus Games struggled financially one year, Harry reportedly reached out to Beckham for renewed sponsorship. The call, according to one insider, didn't go well. Beckham declined politely, citing scheduling conflicts, but Harry took it as rejection. From then on, their rivalry was sealed. The irony was painful. The man who had once supported Harry's vision now became a symbol of everything he fought against, the curated perfection of royal image. And so, by the time the knighthood was announced, the tension was already volcanic. Behind palace walls, the selection committee's decision to knight Beckham wasn't just ceremonial. It was symbolic. It was a message. David Beckham represented loyalty. Prince Harry represented rebellion. And in Charles's reign, loyalty was the new crown jewel. The press adored it. From pitch to palace, the headlines sang, "King rewards humility and service." But for Harry, it was more personal than public. He wasn't angry at Beckham for receiving the honor. He was angry at what it represented. That moment of the sword touching Beckham's shoulder wasn't just about football or charity. It was about lineage, legacy, replacement. He saw his father smiling with the same warmth he once gave to him as a child. And that smile hurt more than any insult. Here's the cruel truth about royal life. Admiration is limited. You either have it or you don't. And once it's given to someone else, it rarely returns. Harry had spent his whole life trying to earn that approval, not from the world, but from the man who knighted someone else in his place. The footage from the ceremony captured that perfectly. As Charles said the words, "Arise, Sir David," Harry's face was unreadable. But if you slowed the footage, you'd notice it, the faint twitch of his jaw, the tightening of his hands. A man holding back years of unspoken words. And then, of course, he couldn't hold them back any longer. The shout came from somewhere deeper than anger. It came from grief. Because beneath all the rivalry, all the headlines, all the royal politics, it was still a son watching his father give away the pride he'd spent his life chasing. But that day wasn't just an explosion of emotion. It was the eruption of years of carefully hidden fractures. What most people didn't know was that, months before the knighthood, a confidential palace memo had surfaced, an internal briefing outlining the new faces of modern British representation. The list included actors, entrepreneurs, scientists, and at the top, David Beckham. Harry's name wasn't on it. When that memo leaked, insiders say Harry was devastated. He reportedly told Meghan, "They're replacing me, bit by bit." And when the knighthood became official, he wasn't wrong. There's a photo from that day. One the palace never released publicly. It shows Beckham shaking hands with Charles after receiving his medal. In the blurred background, you can just make out Harry, standing near a pillar, staring straight at them. No smile. No words. Just eyes full of something raw. Jealousy? Maybe. But more likely, loss. The loss of a role, of meaning, of family. Because deep down, Harry's rivalry with Beckham wasn't about fame or honor. It was about identity. Beckham symbolized everything the monarchy wanted: obedience without rebellion, charm without controversy, influence without unpredictability. Harry symbolized the opposite. And in Charles's careful balancing act, there wasn't room for both. So, the rivalry grew, not in fiery confrontation, but in quiet moments of exclusion. When Beckham was invited to Balmoral for a private weekend, Harry wasn't. When Charles referenced Beckham's philanthropy in speeches, he didn't mention his own son's military service. Even at public events, Charles seemed warmer, more relaxed, more at ease with the footballer than his own child. For Harry, that wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. And it built, day by day, like pressure behind glass. Until Windsor. When he saw Beckham kneeling that morning, sword glinting, cameras flashing, it wasn't just ceremony. It was final confirmation that he'd been replaced. Not in title, in heart. Because love, in royal terms, often looks like preference. And Charles's preference that day was clear. But the world didn't know the full truth yet. There was one more layer to this rivalry that hadn't been exposed. One that went far beyond royal ceremonies or personal feelings. Because Beckham's connection to the monarchy went deeper than anyone suspected. There were private meetings, quiet phone calls, sealed letters of gratitude, and, according to palace insiders, one secret pact between the king and Beckham that had been years in the making. And that's what would turn a personal rivalry into a royal crisis. Because the day Beckham was knighted wasn't just about recognition. It was about loyalty and what it costs to buy it. But before that secret surfaced, the world would see the fallout of that Windsor explosion. The headlines, the division, the speculation, all feeding one central question. Had King Charles just knighted the man who symbolically replaced his son? The answer would come soon. But when it did, it wouldn't just expose a royal rivalry. It would reveal the very cracks in the foundation of the monarchy itself. Because what came next would make even Windsor's silence look calm. The next revelation would reach all the way back to Diana. And it would change everything. Before the cameras, before the sword, before the shout that shattered Windsor's silence, there was a phone call. It was the kind of call that begins with hope and ends with heartbreak. The kind of call that changes the entire tone of a lifetime relationship in a single, quiet moment. Prince Harry was in California, sitting on the balcony of his Montecito home, staring at the Pacific horizon when his phone buzzed. It was early morning in Los Angeles, but nearly evening in London. He hesitated before answering. The caller ID flashed a name he hadn't seen in months: Clarence House. For a split second, he thought maybe, just maybe, it was his father. He took a deep breath and answered, "Hello." But it wasn't Charles. It was one of the king's senior aides, Sir Clive Howard, an old-school man with a polished accent and the empathy of a press release. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Sir Clive began, his voice formal, distant. "His Majesty asked me to inform you personally of tomorrow's ceremony at Windsor." Harry frowned. "What ceremony?" There was a pause, the kind that drips with unspoken tension. "The knighthood ceremony, sir. His Majesty will be investing Mr. David Beckham with the Order of the British Empire, Knight Bachelor." Harry's heartbeat slowed. "David Beckham?" he repeated, as if he hadn't heard right. "Yes, sir. His Majesty felt it important to recognize Mr. Beckham's decades of service to the nation. It will be a televised event." Harry didn't speak for several seconds. The wind brushed the phone mic, and all Sir Clive could hear was the ocean. Then Harry asked quietly, "And you're calling to invite me?" Another pause. "No, sir," Sir Clive said softly. "I'm calling to inform you, so you're not surprised by press coverage." Harry's jaw tightened. "Not surprised? You mean humiliated?" "Sir," he cut him off. "You could have just sent an email, Clive. His Majesty wished for it to be handled delicately." Delicately. That word always made Harry laugh bitterly. That's how the palace described everything painful. They didn't say excluded. They said handled delicately. They didn't say erased. They said streamlined for optics. He hung up before the aide could finish. For a few minutes, he just sat there, phone on his lap, staring out at the ocean waves crashing against the rocks. Meghan came outside, wrapped in a robe, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Was that your father?" she asked, hopeful. Harry shook his head. "His mouthpiece." "What happened?" He took a deep breath. "He's knighting David Beckham tomorrow." Meghan's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "Yeah." He forced a laugh that didn't sound like laughter. Guess he finally found the son he always wanted. The bitterness in his voice lingered like smoke. Megan sat beside him, quiet for a moment, searching his face. "Harry," she said softly, "you can't take this personally." He turned to her sharply. "How can I not? He's knighting the man who replaced me. Do you realize what that looks like?" She set her coffee down, choosing her words carefully. "It looks like what it's always been, a show. A crown performing for its audience. It's not about you." But Harry wasn't listening anymore. His mind was already back in Windsor. The marble floors, the smell of polished brass, the way his father's hand would tremble slightly when lifting the sword, a detail only Harry ever noticed. He'd watched it since childhood, the ceremony after ceremony, wishing one day it would be him receiving that nod of pride. Now, it would be Beckham. He picked up his phone again and stared at the contact list. His finger hovered over one name, Father. He hadn't called in months. The last time he did, it ended in silence and sighs. But something inside him refused to let this go unspoken. He hit call. The line rang twice before a tired, familiar voice answered. "Harry." It wasn't the king's voice from the balcony speeches or televised addresses. It was smaller, quieter, human. "Hi, Pa," Harry said cautiously. "I just heard." There was a pause. "About the ceremony?" "Yeah. I thought someone might have informed you." "They did. Just now." Charles sighed softly. "I didn't want you to hear it from the papers." "That's considerate," Harry said flatly. "Harry." Charles's tone softened. "This isn't about you." "I know it's not about me," Harry snapped. "That's the problem." Silence again. Long, heavy, uncomfortable. "Finally," Charles said, "David has served this country well. It's his time." Harry laughed bitterly. "His time? He kicks a ball, Pa. I fought in a war." "Harry, don't do this." "I'm not doing anything. I'm just asking what I did to deserve being replaced." "You haven't been replaced." "Then why does it feel like you found another son to stand beside you?" Charles hesitated. "Because he hasn't abandoned the family." Those words landed like a bullet. Harry's chest tightened. "Abandoned? I didn't abandon anyone. I left a system that was killing me." "And what about the rest of us?" Charles asked quietly. "You left us behind to deal with the aftermath." Harry was silent. Charles continued. "You think it's easy, being a father whose son attacks the institution he swore to uphold." "The institution, not you," Harry said, his voice cracking. "I attacked the lies. The silence. And that silence," Charles said slowly, "is what keeps the monarchy alive." The words cut deep. For a moment, Harry didn't respond. Then he said, barely above a whisper, "You'd rather keep the crown alive than your family." Charles exhaled. "That's unfair." "No, Pa. What's unfair is watching you knight another man like he's your heir. That's not what this is." "Then what is it? Tell me." "It's duty." Harry shook his head, even though his father couldn't see it. "No, it's replacement dressed as duty." There was another long pause. Then Charles said, quietly, "I wish you wouldn't see enemies where there are none." Harry's voice hardened. "Then maybe stop creating them." Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Charles ended the call with the same words he always used when he didn't know what else to say. "Good night, my boy." But this time, the phrase sounded hollow. When the line went dead, Harry sat there for a long time, phone still in hand. Megan gently touched his arm. "What did he say?" "Nothing that changes anything," Harry whispered. "But I can't let this happen without being there." Megan's brow furrowed. "Harry, don't." He stood up abruptly. "I have to." "Why?" "To prove what?" "That I still exist." His voice broke mid-sentence. He rubbed his eyes, trying to hide the tears. I need him to see me." Megan didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. That night, Harry packed a small bag, ignoring her pleading look. He booked a private flight to London under an alias. On the flight, he replayed the call in his mind over and over. Every word, every silence. The subtext was clear. His father had made peace with his distance, but Harry hadn't. He tried to sleep, but couldn't. His mind wandered to the last time they'd stood face to face, at the Queen's funeral. They'd exchanged polite nods, hollow condolences, no emotion. And now, a year later, his father would knight another man in the very castle where Harry once played hide-and-seek as a boy. He stared out the plane window at the clouds below and whispered, "You can't erase me, Pa. You can't." Hours later, as the jet descended into London, dawn was breaking over the city. The streets glistened from overnight rain. The castle towers rose in the distance, unchanged, eternal, indifferent. Harry tightened his coat and walked briskly through the terminal, hat pulled low, sunglasses on. He didn't want the press to know. This wasn't about headlines. This was personal. Somewhere inside that stone fortress, his father was rehearsing a speech that didn't include him. And David Beckham, the man who had once stood beside him as a friend, was about to kneel before the king as a knight. Harry clenched his fists as the black car pulled away from Heathrow. He wasn't sure what he'd do once he got there. He only knew one thing. He couldn't stay silent anymore. The palace wasn't expecting him. Charles wasn't ready for him. Beckham had no idea. But fate was ready. Because the moment that sword rose, Harry would lose control of everything he'd fought to contain. And that phone call, the one that began as a formality, would become the trigger for one of the most shocking public meltdowns in modern royal history. But that wasn't the only secret lurking behind that call. Hours after Harry's plane landed, another conversation took place inside Clarence's house. Sir Clive Howard entered the king's private study, closing the door behind him. Charles sat by the window, staring at an old photograph, Diana with her sons, smiling in the garden. "Did you speak to him, sir?" Charles asked quietly. "I did, your majesty." He didn't take it well. Charles nodded. "I didn't expect him to." Sir Clive hesitated. "Shall I alert security in case he arrives?" Charles looked up sharply. "He won't come." But even as he said it, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Sir Clive adjusted his cufflinks. "Forgive me, sir, but the prince has always been unpredictable." Charles sighed. "He's still my son." "Yes, sir." "Which makes him all the more unpredictable." Charles said nothing. He turned back to the window, watching the clouds roll over Windsor. If only he knew how right his aide was. Because at that very moment, a black car was winding through the countryside toward the castle gates. Inside sat the son he'd underestimated, haunted, desperate, and ready to confront the man who had just called someone else's pride. What neither of them knew was that the confrontation about to unfold would be caught on camera, dissected by the press, and remembered forever. But before the world saw what happened in that grand hall, another message was sent, a message that would fuel conspiracy for years to come. A single text, from an unknown number, received on Harry's phone minutes before the ceremony. It read, "He knows you're not supposed to be there, but he knows why you're coming." Harry froze when he saw it. The sender was anonymous. The timing, impossible. And that was when he realized the story wasn't just about a knighthood. It was about something far deeper. Something his mother had once warned him about. And what came next would prove her right. The ghosts of Windsor wear pearls and perfume. They linger in the halls, in portraits, in the sound of silk brushing across marble. And for Harry, one ghost never left. Her name was Diana. Every decision he made, every fight he picked, every tear he shed, somehow, she was always there, watching. Not haunting him exactly, guiding him, protecting him. And on that cold morning when he arrived uninvited at the castle, her presence felt stronger than ever. As he walked past the gates, past the guards who recognized him but said nothing, Harry felt that familiar ache. He had walked these paths with her once, tiny hand clutching hers, laughing as she pointed out the swans drifting along the moat. She had promised him, one day, love will matter more than duty. That sentence had shaped his entire life. It was the reason he left the monarchy, the reason he fought the system, and the reason he now found himself back here, defying it. The air inside Windsor felt heavy, almost electric. He could smell the faint trace of polish and flowers, lavender, her favorite. Or maybe he only imagined it. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself. "You're not a child anymore." But inside he was. The little boy who had followed his mother's coffin down the mall was still there, terrified of losing love again. Because that's what this was really about. Not anger, not rebellion, but loss. A loss that began long before David Beckham ever knelt for a sword. It began the day Diana died. When the news broke, Harry was 12. Too young to understand, too old to forget. The nation mourned, the world wept, but Harry's grief was private, quiet, confused. He wasn't allowed to cry publicly. Stiff upper lip, they told him. For the people. And that was when the distance between father and son truly began. Charles didn't know how to comfort him. He stood awkwardly, offering a hand on the shoulder instead of an embrace. The same gesture he would repeat decades later, at the Queen's funeral, and again at every public event where emotion might have spilled out. Diana had been warmth. Charles was duty. And for a boy like Harry, love without warmth felt like punishment. So he grew up learning that affection was earned, not given. That if he wanted approval, he had to perform for it. Smile wider. March straighter. Stay silent longer. But Diana had warned him. There was a story, one Harry never forgot. A few months before she died, she sat with him on the edge of her bed at Kensington Palace, brushing his hair back from his forehead. He'd just asked her why the photographers always followed her. Because they want what they can't have, she said softly. And they'll never stop until they destroy it. He frowned. But you said love wins. She smiled sadly. It does. But in this family, love is dangerous. Harry never understood what she meant back then. But as he grew older, he saw it everywhere. The quiet wars fought behind closed doors, the calculated coldness, the smiles hiding betrayal. When Meghan came into his life, he thought he'd escaped that cycle. But the moment she entered the royal world, the ghosts stirred again. The same headlines, the same hatred, the same loneliness. And Harry realized something chilling. History was repeating itself. That's when he began revisiting Diana's letters, the ones she'd written in her final years, tucked away in boxes marked private. Some of those letters, Harry later told friends, felt like messages written directly for him. In one, she had written, "Never let them convince you that silence equals loyalty. Silence is their favorite weapon." Those words burned in his memory. So when the palace issued that phone call about Beckham's knighthood, Harry felt the weight of those letters pressing on his chest. He could almost hear her voice. "They're replacing you, darling. Because you stopped being useful." He hated that it made sense. By the time he stepped inside the Grand Hall of Windsor, the ceremony was minutes away. The room glittered with chandeliers and uniforms, but Harry only saw ghosts. The last time he stood in that hall was during a memorial for his mother. He had been a boy in uniform then too, staring at a portrait of her smiling in light that never reached him. He had promised himself that day he'd never let her be erased. And now, it was happening again. Because in his eyes, the ceremony wasn't just about David Beckham. It was about his father rewriting the family narrative. About showing the world that the monarchy didn't need Diana's legacy anymore. That they could trade heartbreak for hero worship. And Beckham, handsome, loyal, controlled, fit perfectly into that narrative. To the world, it looked like a knight honoring a king. To Harry, it looked like a father replacing his late wife's son with a safer version. It's hard to describe what it feels like to lose your place in a story you were born into. But for Harry, that's exactly what had happened. The monarchy wasn't just his family. It was a machine built to survive, even if it had to erase its own parts to keep running. And Diana had seen it coming. There were whispers that she once told a close friend, "They'll destroy one of my boys to protect the other." It sounded like paranoia then. But looking at the way history unfolded, it felt prophetic. William had become the heir, the dutiful prince, the perfect image of continuity. Harry, the spare, became the scapegoat, the emotional one, the unpredictable one, and that label followed him everywhere. So when the tabloids spun headlines after Windsor, Harry's jealous rage, Prince loses control, it didn't surprise him. It was the same story, recycled from Diana's playbook. When she cried, they called her unstable. When she spoke up, they called her manipulative. The monarchy doesn't destroy its rebels outright. It isolates them until they break. And Harry knew it. But knowing doesn't mean healing. That day, as Charles raised his sword, Harry saw more than a father in Beckham. He saw the reflection of his mother's worst fear, that the institution she tried to expose had won. He could almost hear her whisper again, "They'll use love against you, my darling." And maybe that's why he shouted. Because for once, he wanted to fight back, not against his father, but against the pattern. Against the quiet erasure of everything Diana had stood for. The cameras didn't capture the flicker of grief on his face when he said those 6 words. But the people who knew him, those who truly knew him, understood. It wasn't anger. It was mourning. The mourning of a boy who had lost his mother twice. Once to a crash, and again to time. He saw in Beckham what his father wished he saw in him. Stability, perfection, composure. The very things Diana had rejected. And that irony broke him. Because the woman who had taught him to live with heart had given birth to a man being punished for doing exactly that. For years, Harry tried to hold on to her spirit. Every charity he supported Every veteran he helped, every speech about compassion, it was her voice echoing through his actions. But the palace never saw it that way. To them, his passion was recklessness. His emotion was rebellion. And Diana's love, which once humanized the monarchy, had become its greatest threat. In that way, she still haunted them. Her legacy lived in Harry's defiance, in his refusal to smile for tradition. Every time he spoke honestly, he reminded them of her honesty. Every time he broke protocol, he reminded them of her courage. And that's why the monarchy feared him, because they couldn't control what Diana left behind. They could bury her body, but not her influence. That's what made the Windsor confrontation so powerful. It wasn't just a son defying his father. It was a continuation of Diana's rebellion, decades after her death. And Charles knew it. When Harry shouted those words, witnesses said the king looked momentarily stunned, not just by the outburst, but by the familiarity of it. For a heartbeat, it was as if Diana herself had returned to challenge him again. One aide later described it perfectly. It was like watching a ghost scold the king, because Charles had heard that tone before. In arguments with Diana, in late-night confrontations that ended in silence and slammed doors. She had accused him of emotional neglect, of choosing image over intimacy, of loving the crown more than the people under it. Now, decades later, her son was repeating those accusations. Different words, same wounds. And that's what terrified Charles most. Because ghosts don't die when you ignore them. They grow louder. After the ceremony, when the palace scrambled to control the narrative, one image began circulating online. A grainy photo of Harry walking away from Windsor, his face half hidden by shadow. Someone zoomed in on the frame and noticed a small pin on his lapel, a gold rose. It was the same emblem Diana wore during one of her final visits to Kensington. Coincidence? Maybe. But to many, it felt symbolic. The ghost of Diana Spencer had returned, not in body, but in blood. And this time, she was speaking through her son. The world saw drama. But to Harry, it was justice, a reckoning years in the making. Because while Charles may have been the king that day, the spirit of the people's princess had stolen the throne for one brief, defiant moment. Still, the deeper question remained. Was Harry's outburst truly spontaneous? Or was it the final act of a man who had uncovered something from his mother's past? Something that proved her suspicions right all along? Because hours before that ceremony, a journalist received an anonymous package. Inside was a handwritten letter from Diana, dated just weeks before her death. It read, "I fear there are plans forming that involve my sons. One will be protected, the other will be pitted against him. Tell them to look for the truth when they are men. It will be found in Windsor." That letter was never meant to surface. It was buried, hidden, forgotten, until now. And as investigators authenticated the handwriting, questions exploded across every media outlet. What truth had Diana left behind? What had been buried in Windsor all these years? And was that what Harry had come for? Not just to confront his father, but to uncover the secret his mother died fearing? Because if that letter was real, it meant one thing. Diana saw this coming. And what her letter hinted at would soon tear apart what was left of the royal family. The truth was buried deep beneath Windsor's walls. And Harry had just begun digging in the polished corridors of Buckingham and Windsor. Power isn't just about birthright anymore. It's about public image. In this modern monarchy, the crown gleams brighter under the flash of cameras, and few people understand that currency better than David Beckham. He wasn't just a football legend. He was the monarchy's mirror, disciplined, loyal, charismatic, and uncontroversial. The kind of man who could walk into a palace event and charm every guard, every duchess, every camera lens. He represented the one thing the royal family needed most in the 21st century, stability. And that's exactly why King Charles trusted him. It didn't start with knighthood. Their bond had been forming for years. Quiet meetings, friendly dinners, mutual admiration that felt both strategic and sincere. Charles saw in Beckham a kind of devotion he rarely found, even in his own bloodline. Beckham admired the king's environmental work and once said in an interview, "He's always been ahead of his time." That quote had stuck with Charles, because so few people ever said that about him, especially his sons. Theirs was a relationship built on admiration and advantage. For Charles, Beckham represented proof that the monarchy could evolve. It could embrace fame without scandal. For Beckham, Proximity to the king gave him gravitas, legitimacy, a connection to something ancient and timeless. But to Harry, that bond was poison. He saw it for what it was, the monarchy's way of proving it could thrive without him. And that made every handshake, every shared smile, every carefully staged photo feel like a knife twisting deeper. Inside the palace, Beckham became a regular presence. He attended private fundraisers, hosted quiet meetings for royal initiatives, and even offered to help modernize the monarchy's image through social media campaigns. A royal insider once described him as the unofficial ambassador of the new monarchy. It was subtle but deliberate. Charles had learned from the mistakes of the past. After decades of scandal, Diana, Camilla, Meghan, Harry, he understood that the monarchy's survival depended not on lineage, but on likability. And Beckham, with his immaculate suits and humble smile, made the monarchy likable again. The partnership worked. Public opinion soared after every event Beckham attended. Newspapers ran glowing headlines, a modern king with modern allies. Beckham and the Crown, the new British power duo. Meanwhile, in California, Harry watched the coverage unfold like a slow-motion betrayal. Every article that celebrated Beckham felt like another obituary for his own relevance. It wasn't just professional jealousy. It was personal displacement. The irony was brutal. Beckham had once been Harry's ally. During the early Invictus Games, he had stood by Harry's side, helping recruit athletes, funding events, and promoting the cause worldwide. They had laughed together, shared inside jokes, bonded over military discipline and media scrutiny. But when the royal rift deepened, Beckham didn't pick a side. He stayed loyal to the crown. And to Harry, neutrality felt like betrayal. When the palace announced Beckham's knighthood, it wasn't just an honor, it was a statement. A coronation of the celebrity ally over the royal rebel. The night before the ceremony, Charles sat in his study with a glass of brandy, staring at the finalized guest list. His secretary hovered nervously nearby. "Sir," the man asked, "are you certain you wish to proceed with this investiture now, with the ongoing family matters?" Charles didn't look up. "Yes, especially now." The aide hesitated. "It may be interpreted personally." Charles smiled faintly. "Everything in this family is interpreted personally." He took another sip of brandy. "Let the boy see what loyalty looks like." Those words would echo in his mind for weeks afterward. Because the next day, when Harry appeared at Windsor, uninvited, unannounced, Charles realized too late that loyalty and love were two very different things. But long before that explosion, there were already cracks forming in the so-called royal celebrity alliance. Beckham, for all his polish, had his own quiet doubts. He had seen the way Charles spoke about his sons, always measured, never emotional. He had watched the tension between the brothers unfold in headlines. He admired the king, yes, but he couldn't ignore the human cost of royal life. In private, he once told a friend, "It's like watching a family where nobody's allowed to hug." Still, Beckham understood his role. He wasn't there to question, he was there to represent. The monarchy gave him legitimacy. He gave it modernity. It was a transactional friendship dressed in the language of honor. Until Harry's voice cracked the illusion. When he shouted, "I'm your child," not him. Beckham froze, not because he felt guilt, but because he finally understood what he'd been dragged into. He hadn't replaced anyone, but the monarchy had used him to fill a void it didn't want to acknowledge. And now, the world saw it. The ceremony, replayed millions of times online, became a cultural flashpoint, the perfect metaphor for a monarchy trying to stay relevant by adopting celebrity while abandoning family. Public opinion fractured. Some applauded Charles for honoring Beckham's achievements. Others accused him of humiliating his son. Conspiracy theorists spun wild stories about hidden family feuds, secret messages, coded gestures. But inside the palace, the truth was simpler. Charles was tired. Tired of headlines. Tired of drama. Tired of being the man always compared to ghosts. Beckham offered peace, or at least the illusion of it. And that illusion, for a monarch drowning in controversy, was priceless. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from Windsor shook the palace's inner circle. Aides whispered about the California problem. Publicists scrambled to repair the narrative. Beckham remained silent, issuing only one statement thanking the king and expressing deep respect for His Majesty's lifelong service. It was textbook diplomacy, but behind the scenes, The silence spoke volumes. Harry, meanwhile, withdrew. The images haunted him. His father's calm expression, Beckham's bowed head, the world watching as he unraveled. He tried to convince himself it didn't matter. But deep down, he knew it did. Because this wasn't just a ceremony. It was the moment the monarchy proved it could move on without him. Still, something about the whole event didn't sit right. Too perfect, too polished, too deliberate. And then, months later, Harry's suspicions were confirmed when a former palace aide, anonymously quoted in a London paper, revealed that the knighthood had been planned years earlier, not for service, but for strategy. Beckham was chosen because he was the safe face of modern Britain, the source said. He represented everything the palace wanted to project: humility, discipline, and patriotism. It was about image, not honor. That revelation reopened old wounds.